What if the problem isn't you? What if you're in the wrong room? My suspicion? You're not broken and you don't need to be fixed. You've outgrown where you are. Let's get more space and freedom to redesign the life you deserve. Welcome to the Reinvention Room. I'm Allison Hare, podcast launch strategist for ambitious leaders, and we are rethinking everything we've been taught. Part pop culture, part real talk, and all smarter ways to live life on your own terms. Have you found yourself flooded by the news? Of course you have. You can't escape it. You might be feeling utterly helpless, overwhelmed, and exhausted, not knowing whether to stand up and fight. Where do you even begin? Or crawl under your pillow until further notice. It is a heavy time. But today is the day you are going to be fired up. I almost passed out when I interviewed her because my guest today is the legendary Shannon Watts. Shannon Watts is the founder of Moms Demand Action, the largest grassroots group fighting gun violence in the U.S. She is known as the summoner of women's audacity. She's been named one of Time's 100 most influential people, a Forbes 50 over 50 changemaker, and Glamour Woman of the Year. During the 2024 election, she organized the largest Zoom gathering in history, mobilizing over 200,000 voters. I was actually on that call, and raising over $11 million in support of the Kamala Harris campaign. She is helping to redefine what's possible when audacious women unite to drive change. She writes regularly about culture, politics, and women's issues for her Substack, For Playing with Fire, and outlets like The Washington Post, Elle, Time, The 19th. Her new book, Fired Up, How to Turn Your Spark into a Flame and Come Alive at Any Age, was just released in June and came from a request from, get this, Maria Shriver. This isn't just about activism, though. It is a reclamation of who you truly are, what sets you on fire, and what story are you finally ready to live. It could be finally starting that business or asking for a divorce. There is nothing that will stand in your way from whatever you want to accomplish. But before we jump into it, make sure that you share this episode with the people in your life that are the change makers. They want to make a difference and they will not quit until their mark is made. Text this to them now, share it on their socials. Let's get fired up with Shannon Watts. On Reinvention Room, welcome to Shannon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I am curious, you have been on this tour. You fired up this book that you released. Your second book is a instant New York Times bestseller, which is really hard to do, and is for all puns intended, but like is really sparking fires and flames all over the place. What are you fired up about this week? Like, what is living rent free in your mind right now that is kind of like an epiphany?
I wrote this book thinking we were going to have the first woman president, honestly. And I still think that this book meets the moment that we're in. I'm not sure there's ever been a more important time for women to bring their values, abilities, and desires to the table in all aspects of their life, personal, political, professional. And what I'm finding, I just got home for a brief respite from my first half of my book tour, and these conversations are so amazing. Women who have good ideas of how to be helpful or how to reset. And that really is invigorating to hear the impact that the book is having on them.
Yeah, I think what I loved about your book, I read it in a weekend. It was so good. It was so easy to read. It was so just the storytelling is visceral. And what really stuck out to me and where I really wanted to start is where you started, and
Yeah.
the thought of like having either a bias towards action or a bias towards let someone else do it. which is
Yeah.
what you were told in the beginning. Can you talk about your experience starting Moms Demand Action?
Yeah, it was 2012, obviously. That's when the horrific Sandy Hook school shooting happened. And I was at the end of a 5-year break that I was taking from my career. I was a corporate communications executive for over a decade. And I was blending my family. I had just remarried, and my husband had 2 children, and I have three. And so I just thought, I'll take a break, get my kids, through school and kind of get this family situated. And I was the one cooking and driving and doing all the mom stuff. And it was the end of that break. I was starting to think about going back to work when I was folding laundry a very cold day in December. I was living in Indiana, and I saw that there was an active shooter on the news inside a school in Connecticut. And I kind of, I'm sure like you and everyone listening, spent the rest of the day just in tears. I couldn't believe that this tragedy was unfolding, that 20 children and 6 educators could be slaughtered inside the sanctity of an American elementary school. And at some point during that night, while I was sleeping, that sadness turned into total rage. And I
Mm,
just felt the next day, I'd watched as an American as nothing had been done after the shootings in Columbine and Virginia Tech and Gabby Giffords. And I just thought, Americans have to do something. We have to get off the sidelines, because I don't know that our elected officials will. And, I had been so impacted by Mothers Against Drunk Driving in high school growing up in the 70s and 80s, where these, angry women changed the culture and the laws in less than a decade. And I thought, we need something like that for gun safety to encourage the responsibilities that should go along with gun rights. And so I started a Facebook page, and it went viral. Women were reaching out to me from all over the country saying, how do I do this where I live? And I can remember in those early days, back to your question, there were so many people that I reached out to for advice and help who said, this can't be done. You're not the right person to do it. It's already been done. All these reasons why I shouldn't keep going. And I just decided that, if I lost my children, I had nothing left to lose, and I was going to trust my gut.
mm. I wonder about you aren't the person to do that. Where did that come from? What did that mean?
Well, I think what they were thinking was, nothing about gun violence prevention, the legislative process, or organizing. Fair. And there was a part of me that agreed, because I had had severe untreated ADHD my whole life. I had a debilitating fear of public speaking, right? So you add all these things up, and it's not really someone anyone would point to and say, oh, that person should take on the most powerful, wealthy special interest that's ever existed. And
Yeah.
yet I was exactly the right person for the job, it turns out. So I think, because I was a woman, there were really no women led gun violence prevention organizations before Moms Demand Action. Because I was a stay at home mom at the time living in Indiana, I was kind of a random person to rise up and to carry this mantle. I was not a gun violence survivor. I was just a very angry mom. So there were tons of reasons why I shouldn't have been the right person, but I just knew that I was.
Isn't that something? And, the way I'm thinking about this is that as politics is unfolding as it is now in such a rapid
Yeah.
vortex of chaos, of nobody knows which way is up, it feels very hopeless. But at the same time, there is an uprising, right? Like, how do we know that it's time to double down or it is time to act? I think it's so easy. I'm kind of caught in between like this narrowing capacity for the news.
Yep.
I don't understand, Shannon. I literally have thought about, I don't know how you are constantly hearing these stories of people being shot, even outside of
Yeah.
the news cycles, that you have run into the fire. And so there is such an allure to retreating back to the comfort of everything is perfect and somebody else can handle it. How do you keep yourself edging towards action and
Yep.
towards you do have power.
I go back to the early days when, the good news about not being a public figure and having all of my information out there was that it helped women and moms get in touch with me. The
Mm.
bad thing about that was that it also allowed extremists to make threats of death and sexual violence to me and to my family. And in those early days, I called the local police department in Indiana because there were people driving by my house, clearly people who had found my address online. And the officer came out and I explained what was going on. And he said, "Well, ma'am, that's what you get when you mess with the Second Amendment." And
Oh,
I just knew in that moment that I had a choice, that I was either going to back down or I was going to double down. And that's a choice we all have to make for ourselves. I don't want anyone to be afraid, but I also want people to understand that the point of people trying to make you afraid is to silence and intimidate you.
mm.
And there's a quote from Alice Walker that is, "Activism is the rent I pay to live on the planet." And I never thought of myself as an activist. But we all have an obligation in a democracy to play a role in protecting the democracy that we are so fortunate to have been born into or to live in. And it's kind of like a sick child, right? I mean, at 3 a.m., if your child is throwing up and you're exhausted, you don't say to them, "Wow, I'm sorry you're not feeling well, but I need to go get some sleep and let's just touch base at 8 a.m. and see how you're feeling," right? No mom does that. No parent does that. Well, we stay and we hold that kid's hand until they're better. And I think a democracy is no different. There are a lot of people who can feel hopeless or helpless right now, and that turns into cynicism, which turns into an excuse for inaction. And so every day we
Ooh.
really do have to choose hope.
Yeah, I love what you're talking about this. When I think about the blowback and I think about this book, Fired Up, what came to me so profoundly is how unflinching you are about blowback. Like you
Mm.
are not putting any kind of varnish on it. You're not it is part of, if you want something great, blowback is going to be there. And I love your approach on that. And I'm curious, was that a thought around, like, did you want to kind of skirt it? Or was that a conscious decision to put it out front and center?
I tell my story in the book about the blowback I experienced to give some context, which is, it is unlikely you're going to face the levels of blowback that I have as the tip of the spear on an issue that can be, polarizing. But no matter what you decide to do when you're living on fire, and that's really just a metaphor for figuring out two things: what's limiting you and what's calling you, right?
Hmm.
And when you decide to live differently, maybe you're doing more, maybe you're doing less, but you're doing things differently because you don't want to live on autopilot, because you want to feel like at the end of your life you burned. That will create blowback, especially for women. And I've had so many women say to me, "Oh, I'd love to do X, but I'm worried about the blowback." That could be a tough conversation with a family member. It could be asking for a promotion. It could be deciding to volunteer. It could be a whole host of things that you want to do to live a life in which you leave a legacy. And so this is really, in many ways, a manual for the blowback you'll get. I interview over 70 women, many of whom have experienced blowback. It could be a snarky comment in the pickup line at your kid's school. It could be something your mother-in-law says about an event you missed. And blowback really triggers feelings of guilt and shame in all of us. It's
Mm.
either external or it's internal, but there are those feelings there. And when we get triggered, we go into what I call emotional traps. That can be a desire to disappear. It can be people pleasing. It can be martyrdom. It can be perfectionism. It can be a fear of failure. It's all of these different things that we each habituate toward, right? For me, I talk about martyrdom and how I didn't take any pay for 11 years because I wanted to be seen as a good girl.
This is so
Yes,
crazy to me,
I
Shannon.
know.
That is so bananas.
And
Do
I
you
didn't
think that was the
realize
right
it
choice? You
until
took 0 pay.
no,
Do you
no.
think that was a good choice?
I think it was a horrible example for other women. And I didn't realize it until several years in. And then I felt like it was too late. But I realize now what I was doing, which was to be like, don't criticize me. I don't want the blowback. I can tell you that I'm a good girl because I'm not getting paid. So I can do all this, something that a very much a double standard that a man would never face. But I also talk about how to reframe the blowback, and there's so many exercise and journal prompts in the book, but just to kind of give you an overview, it's reframing those thoughts, having compassion for yourself, meditating so those you can kind of separate what's personal. I say all blowback is predictable and none of it is personal.
Hmm.
Also, figuring out who is giving you the criticism and deciding if it's worthy, right? There are a lot of people, perfect strangers, who are going to criticize you. They don't know you. Why take that so personally? And then the last way to deal with it is just to remember that you're a role model, right? And a lot of what we do when we are brave and courageous is a virtuous circle that encourages other women to do the same.
Mm.
But
I,
just back to what you said, I mean, I think your ability to live on fire is directly proportional to the amount of blowback you can endure.
Hey, it's Allison. Thanks for listening. My guest today, Shannon Watts, knows that having a platform to mobilize people can make a huge impact to influence change. And if you're looking to grow your impact and influence and income, a podcast is one of the greatest ways to do it. I'm offering a free clarity call if a podcast has been on your to-do list, but you haven't quite put all the pieces together. Go to AllisonHair.com/free call and let's explore yours. Listen, your future audience is out there. Go talk to them. You talked about in the book about purpose anxiety, and that one hit me right in the heart of how many people really struggle with purpose. And so it is that question of like, do I go outside the lines and not people please? Like that is so hardwired in us to be the martyr, to people please,
Yep.
to fit into society, but knowing that there's so much change and so much we deeply, deeply care about. And I think identifying the discernment over where to focus your energy and what is worth the blowback and what is time to walk away. And I wonder if you have any wisdom to share on us around like identifying that purpose anxiety, but also the discernment of knowing like this is it. I'm on fire.
Yeah, I talk about false fires in the book, things that have been commodified or that we have been sold by the system to believe that are actually our fulfillment. That can be
Mm,
purpose, right? This idea that we have this one thing that if we do, we will have fulfilled our reason for being on earth. Like that is a lot of pressure. Happiness, that we always have to be feeling happy and that we should chase that as an emotion, or busyness. I'm very guilty of this, that we are truly, our purpose is to constantly, have appointments on our calendar to always be productive. And I interview Eve Rodsky, the author of Fair Play, in the book, and she talks about an acronym called CIYOO, complicit in your own oppression. Like we
mm,
start to believe these things and we internalize them, and then we start to think all of our shoulds and our obligations are our desires. And I talk about, men are really taught to fulfill their desires, women are taught to fulfill their obligations. And so your question, which is how do we start to turn that paradigm on its head?
yes.
It's the FIRE formula. And I go into this at length in the book, and there's lots of exercises around it. But this is looking at where you are right now in your life. And maybe you're a high school or college graduate who's trying to figure out your right path before you spend too much time going down the wrong one. Maybe you're a young woman or mom with a family and a career and you feel overwhelmed, but you still want to participate in things you desire. Maybe you're an empty nester and you finally have time on your hands to do the things you've always wanted to do. Or maybe you're a retiree and you have so much wisdom to bring to the world. Those are really the four archetypes. And so I would start by figuring out, first of all, what are your abilities? And women downplay these. So in the book, you'll have to list all the things you've ever done successfully, including, kids' birthday parties. Those are all so-called soft skills, which I hate that phrase, but they are
Yeah.
skills that make us really important contributing members of our communities and our society. And then asking other people what they think your abilities are. That's really, I think, a beautiful way to uncover things about you. And then you can decide, what are the abilities or skills that I don't have that I want, and go get those. The second thing is to identify your values. And there are thousands of personal values, right? And they change throughout your life. In 2012, for me, it was protecting my family and my community. I'm an empty nester now, so my values are slightly different. And it's important to constantly look at where those are in your life, and then your desires. These are often dormant. These are things that we've always wanted to explore or do, and we have been putting them aside. And how do we start prioritizing them? And I always say, women don't fear their fire because they're weak, it's because they're wise. They see the system is set up to get in their way every step of the way, and they
Mm.
decide it's easier to just not to do it at all. And what
Oh,
I
so
want is
true.
for women to ask themselves every day, what do I want?
This is such a powerful reframe. And I think also an invitation to have permission to ask yourself, like, what do I want?
Yes.
Outside of what you've been kind of socially engineered to want.
Yes.
One of the things that I talk about a lot, as we kind of pivot from like, okay, now we're fired up. And what I love about this book is like, I'm ready to run through walls. It
Good.
really is great. Like you systematically kind of take every single roadblock that are there, and you're like, okay, here it is. Here's how we get over it, get around it, get through it, whatever. Let's talk about one of those roadblocks that is happening a lot. And I am somebody that is left leaning, and I have a text chain of people that are also left leaning where we're like, all right, how can we help? How can we help? Very often we feel helpless. And there are people in
Yes.
our circles that will say things like, I don't do politics. I hate politics. I hate the news. I don't do politics. But I know that that's not true. Like there's just no escaping it.
Yeah. What's the
And
saying? You may not do politics, but politics does you.
what does that mean?
I mean, even if you say you are not political, you are being impacted politically all the time, whether it's your rights, your freedoms, your safety, right? Even if we say we're not engaging politically, we are being impacted politically all the time. So it's really impossible, particularly in a democracy, to live apolitically.
But I also wonder, I think I'm asking more about like communicating with people who may have voted differently.
Mm,
Communicating, like how do you stay connected when it feels like the curtain is down, but it is something that is so important to us. And like discerning is, and not in a position of like necessarily conversion, but like
yeah,
having meaningful discussion. And it
yeah.
feels like in some cases it's off the table. And there are some topics that I will not discuss. Like I will not debate being pro choice. I will
Yeah.
not debate it. I don't understand why the freedom to own a gun, like
Mhm.
why there should be magazine guns
Yeah.
available, like there is no conversation there in my view. But at the same time, they feel the same way
Yeah.
about my views. So how do you is there a bridge?
I think it is so important for us to be having more conversations. I have seen firsthand in my work that you can change hearts and minds when you come to the table with data and anecdotes, and you are in it for the long haul. For example, I'm not a big fan of knocking doors 4 weeks before every election. We need to be having more conversations as communities. Particularly, I think white women, when you look at the big divide between college educated white women and non college educated white women, we don't know our neighbors. We aren't listening to one another empathetically, and we need more of that. Something I'm excited about actually with my book is that some women have taken it already, actually, in over 30 states. And they have started having conversations around the book in person about political, professional, personal empowerment. And that just brings you together so that, after the pandemic and given social media and how polarized we've become as a country, I think what we're often missing is community and conversation. And so I'm
Mhm.
hopeful that this will start a little more of that among women. But I just think also we are often led to believe we are more polarized than we actually are. I mean, when
Huh.
you're talking about gun safety, for example, 70 to 90% of Americans support background checks, depending on whether there's been a recent shooting tragedy. And There's also data that shows Republican women and Democratic women agree on the exact same solutions to gun safety. We are just fed this algorithm constantly to hate one another. I mean, I'm
Mhm.
watching all these tragedies play out, like the Houston or the Austin area flooding, and
Yeah.
there's so much blame and accusation and polarization around this, and when really we should just be coming together to offer our empathy and our support. And we have to figure that out as a country. But look, I will tell you that my dad is a Trump supporter who really was opposed to my work when I first started Moms Demand Action. And we, over years, had more conversations. And eventually he started wearing his mom's shirt and showing up at mom's meetings. And, I'm still pretty sure he voted for Trump in the last election, but we figured out how to come together on this one issue. So I just think
Wow.
community and when you bring your values, abilities, and desires to an issue, you can help impact that issue, right? My background was in communications. I knew how to build a brand. I knew how to tell a story. Someone else may be an accountant, and so their specialty is data entry and understanding, the messaging and how it impacts people. Like every one of us has something to bring to the table when it comes to healing America and making it better.
I think part of it is finding each other as well and finding a place that feels safe. On one hand, like you did a great job being visible, right? Like this started from a Facebook post that all of a sudden started to catch fire and spread, and then the organization of it made it easier for people to connect with people that were able to do it. I do think that we are in an interesting moment where there is so much spotlight on the loneliness epidemic, and so having more spotlight on that actually gives more fuel to like invite people to connect
Yes.
with each other. I think there's a really powerful benefit of that as well. Um, I think about the sustainability of fighting for these issues. Um, I know many years ago, I was so enraged. Like I just was very so enraged by the Trump's first administration with um, the Supreme Brett Kavanaugh being all the Me Too movement. So this was happening where I would cry myself to sleep every single night, seeing friend after friend like boldly and vulnerably tell their Me Too story,
Mm,
and feeling like, why aren't these women being heard? And at the time, Stacey Abrams was running for governor in Georgia. I had never been politically active at all, like no activism whatsoever. And I volunteered in her campaign. I donated money. I believed so deeply, and she lost.
yeah.
And I felt so crestfallen that I worked so hard, but it didn't go my way. And it felt like it was actually going in the opposite way. And I wonder, I know you have very strong feelings and frameworks around sustainability. How do you keep going?
Mm. I get this question a lot. And, one thing I will tell you, and I think this information actually applies very generally to life, but it is not hard to get volunteers to come into an organization when there are mass shootings and lockdown drills. It is hard to get volunteers to stay in any organization because they're giving you their time and their talent out of the goodness of their heart. And, that is limited. And so when people come into an organization and stay, you want to understand why, because we had this amazing attention rate. And eventually we had, over 11 million supporters. So we did a poll and we found two things. The reason our volunteers stayed was one, they felt like they were winning. So it's really important. I don't care if this is personally, politically, professionally. When people feel like they're winning, they will stick around. It's a good use of their time. And if you're not in the gun safety movement, you may not realize we passed over 500 good gun laws, including the first federal legislation in a
500?
generation. 500.
Wow.
The first federal legislation in a generation. It saved countless lives. We completely changed the culture. I mean, when I started Moms Demand Action, a quarter of all Democrats in Congress had an A rating from the NRA. Today, none do. That's a seismic shift in American politics. And we elected thousands of gun sense candidates to office, including our own volunteers. Congresswoman Lucy McBath, was a Moms Demand Action volunteer. So it was, always we would message to our volunteers about how they were winning, and even if they lost, how they were losing forward. And this is, there is looking at failure as feedback. What did you learn when you lost so that you can win the next time? Maybe you lost a legislative battle, but you grew your chapter, or you have new relationships with lawmakers you didn't have before. Always looking at losses as a way to win the next time. The second thing volunteers told us was that they found their people. They kept showing up because they didn't want to disappoint those people, because they wanted to be friends with those people,
Mm.
because those people were like-minded and shared their values. And I think this is getting back to what you were just saying, which is, I call it a bonfire in the book. When you are living on fire, when you are practicing this formula and you are building small and big fires constantly to the end of your life, you will have this group of women who will help you and support you and really be a person who is there for you. It's different, than the friends you make because your kids are little, things like that. I mean, that bonfire based on your fire formula is there to help you, I think, through your entire life.
It feels so purpose driven as well.
Yeah.
And I wonder, about now in Trump's second administration, where it feels like we are really rapidly going in the opposite direction. We're literally losing rights. How do you keep fighting?
I think it's really important to remember that all activism is a marathon, not a sprint. It's also a relay race. You have to pass the baton to someone else when it's time to prioritize your own well being or your family or your loved ones. But this is something we do our whole lives when we live in a democracy. And if you think back to the women who started with suffrage,
Mm.
and they were starved and beaten and imprisoned, and they never saw the fruit of their labor. It took 100 years for all women in this country to have the right to vote. But what they did was so selfless. They created a foundation that subsequent generations could build on. And I think we have to think of our work that way too. Just because it might not get finished in our lifetime, that doesn't mean it's not worth doing. In fact, quite the opposite. It's really
Wow.
important to be building that foundation and understand that you're going to hand the relay race over to the next generation, and that this is just what we do to make the world better.
I'm going to let that breathe for a minute because that's really powerful. What was it like having Maria Shriver call you and say, I want you to write a book? Was that insane?
Yeah, I had, when I was talking about the first federal legislation passed in a generation, and I always knew that this work would be finite for me. I wouldn't do it my whole life. I don't think anyone needs that much power. I don't think it's good for an organization. I never imagined I would do it for 11 years. And so when I was standing in the Rose Garden as President Biden signed that bill into law, I just felt an inner voice or knowing that said, this is the bookend to your activism. And so I told my team, later that year that I was going to step back by the end of 23. I was going to spend the next year saying goodbye and handing the baton over to the next leader. And I thought, okay, I'm going to take a nice long break, figure out what's next in my life. And I
Right.
was running on a treadmill,
How'd that
and I
break
got a
go?
call. Exactly. I looked down at my phone and I'm getting a call from Maria Shriver, someone I didn't know at the time. And she has a book imprint. And she said, I would like you to write a book. And I said, sure, what do you want me to write about? And she said, what have you learned about women in your career in activism? Which, that could be a whole trilogy. And what I really narrowed it down to was, all of these women I had seen either hold themselves back, right? Double back because of the blowback or because of the messy middle or because, these false fires of happiness, busyness, and um, uh, finding a purpose. And then I saw women who did the opposite, which was I held their hand as they stepped through that door, as they practiced the fire formula again and again, and it finally worked. They finally left a toxic relationship or a bad job, or they decided they wanted to start an organization or do something different with their life. And I just realized the formula that they were following was the same one that I did. And I wanted all women to get to their end of their lives and feel like they burned. I think legacy is often a loaded word. It's like your name on the side of a building or creating your own philanthropy. It's not that. It's just getting to the end of your life and knowing that you lived a life that was authentic to you and that you did things that made you come alive. And I think so many of us are on autopilot, or we feel like there's something missing. And so this is really the formula to figure that out before it's too late. And you are not too old. Like, there are probably people who are thinking, oh, well, that ship has sailed. I didn't found Moms Demand Action until I was 41 years old. I wrote a best-selling book at 54. I still feel like I have so much left to do. And I just think our generation is breaking the mold. Our mothers didn't have this opportunity. They had to sort of disappear after their kids went away.
Mm.
It's completely different for us. We get to leave a legacy.
That's so it's so inspiring, and I love, can you talk to us about Answer the Call? Because the way you tell this story is so amazing.
Yes. So, the week after Kamala Harris became the presumptive nominee, I was online and I saw this ticking up of a call by a group called Win with Black Women. And they have a call every Sunday. But I saw these women saying, now there's 1,000 people on the Zoom. Now there's 2,000. I mean, it was going up and it was like up to 10,000 people and then beyond. And I just thought, wow, this is amazing. And they raised over $1 million for Kamala Harris. And then the next few days, a group of Black men did the same thing and raised even more money. And so, because I was up at like 3 a.m., thanks to menopause, I decided to tweet, when will white women emulate these calls and do the same? And I became the de facto organizer
It's
because of
on
that
you.
tweet. Yeah, it was on me. And, within a few days, we organized the largest Zoom in history. We had something like close to 200,000 people on that
I was on
call. We
it.
raised, you were,
Yeah.
we raised $11 million in 2 hours, which is nuts. And I became a Kamala Harris surrogate, and it was just, very much a whirlwind. But I knew nothing about fundraising. I knew nothing about Zoom, and we just sort of flew the plane as we built it. And
Glennon Doyle was
sometimes,
on it. Pink was on it. She was
yes,
calling from her private
her
jet.
private jet after a concert, it was amazing.
Oh, that must feel amazing. Just that forward momentum. Like, I feel like there is such an uprising that's bubbling up, and I think the question is, where do you channel that energy right now? Because there are so many tentacles to what's going on right now. I think identifying where to focus your energy is probably the biggest question that we struggle with.
Yes, I
And
agree.
I wonder, help me understand. I love this. What is a double bind fucksgiving?
That makes it sound like a holiday.
I know. I want to go
The,
to it. A double bind fucksgiving.
the double bind of fucksgiving is this idea that women are expected to be both soft and hard in the world. That we have to give all the fucks about our families and our communities and our country and the world and work to change things in our own lives and in others. But then we also have to give zero fucks. We cannot care what people think about what we're doing, and we have
Mm.
to just keep going forward. And as I say in the book, like, I'm not sure what the solution is to that bind because it just exists. And maybe if we know that that's how we're expected to be and that there will be blowback for being too much of one or the other, that will make it a little easier to deal with. Just knowing that that's what's expected of us.
Yeah, I'm curious, through the past 13, 14 years and even post Moms Demand Action, what are you most surprised about that you didn't see coming?
Oh, I have started writing on Substack and I'm having all these conversations on the road. I will tell you one interesting thing is I ask women that I interview often, what are you worried your deathbed regret will be? And the most common
Mm.
deathbed regret in the world is that I didn't live a life authentic to me. And so I thought that's what women would say. And what almost all of them who were mothers said was that they were worried they would pursue what they desired at the expense of their children. In other words, pursuing what they wanted would make them a bad mom. And I think it's really important to remember, and I interview child psychologists and therapists and experts in the book who say, when women come alive, when they figure out who they are and what they want and they go after it, two things happen with their kids. One is it takes pressure off their kids. And I can say this firsthand. My kids were thrilled that I wasn't putting all my energy into their lives and their homework and their school. And I had something I was passionate about
They were
besides
thrilled.
just them. Yes. But the other thing it does is it gives them an example, right? It's back to this virtuous circle idea. My kids don't say to me, I can't believe you didn't go to that soccer game in 2006. What they say is, thank you for setting an example of how I can pursue what I want, which is
Mm.
completely different than me as an adult. And so I have been really surprised by that. I think women, we need to be having conversations about that fear of what it means. Men don't fear. I mean, talk to any man and that they don't fear that pursuing what they desire will come at the expense of their kids. The other thing is how many women there are, particularly in Gen X, who also have ADHD and weren't
I
diagnosed as
was like
children.
diagnosed too. Yeah.
Yes, it is very,
Hmm.
very common. I think there are a lot of us who live with a lot of shame from not fitting into a school system that thought girls with ADHD were bad, whereas boys were just hyperactive, but girls were bad. And we carry a lot of stigma and a lot of shame with that. And we realize later in life how incredibly potent having ADHD is to
Mm.
being who we are, and that we have to embrace that. And then the last thing I would say is the most common question I get. I think this is something, there are a lot of in this world are introverts. And I get a question almost at every single stop, which is, how can I be both a leader and an introvert? And how do I put myself out into the world and also protect my energy? And that's not an easy balance either. But I am a severe introvert. I'm actually very shy. As I mentioned, I had a terrible fear of public speaking. And there are ways to lead that are unique to introverts. However, there's blowback with that too, right? Like I have people tell me that they think I'm aloof or that I'm cold, and it's just that I am preserving my energy. This is my personality. And
Mm.
I don't, if you can, again, that is predictable. It is not personal.
Isn't that funny that that is still the good girl, right? Like to be
Yeah.
pleasing to everybody. You
Yes.
know, I love what you're saying, and my brain is going in all different ways. This podcast is called the Reinvention Room. How would you describe what state of reinvention you're in right now?
I love this idea of reinvention. And as I said, I don't think there's this one purpose. We have to figure out, are you living for a purpose? Or are you living on purpose? And if it's on purpose, what you're really talking about, what these fires are about, is really fulfillment. And we can find that at every stage of our lives. And so I really want women to start thinking about, I understand I have all these obligations. I understand I have shoulds that I have to fulfill, but am I also thinking at the same time about my dormant desires and not losing sight of those, right? I talk in the book at length about the fact that in my late 30s, I found myself in an emergency room covered in head to toe from eczema that I could not cure. And it was because of the amount of stress that I was under. I was in a career I didn't like, and I was in a marriage that was not working. And because I could not afford a therapist and I could not confide in my husband, I sort of journaled my way toward a roadmap for what I wanted next. And in that period, after I left my job and I left my marriage, I experimented with a lot of things and I failed at a lot of things. But I think what I was really doing was practicing this fire formula so that when Moms Demand Action came along, I was ready for it. And when I left Moms Demand Action, I was ready to put that fire out and start a new one. And that ended up being the Zoom you talked about, and now this book. And then after this, I don't know what it will be. I want a little bit of space, to think about that. But I just think that I can continue to burn until the very end of my life. There's so much that we have to offer in our second half.
You are full of magic and just so much inspiration. Tell us about Firestarter University.
This is such a great, I'm so excited about it. I
It's
didn't
like the
imagine
on-ramp,
this.
right? Like this is the
Yeah.
bridge that you've built to let it be safe for people to cross and connect.
Yeah, this was just sort of, it started out as an incentive to pre-order the book, and it's gone crazy. I think something like 800 women have signed up already. It used to be when you pre-order the book, and now we're still extending the deadline. So when you order the book, you can register at firedupbook.com to enroll in Firestarter University for free, a year-long online program with a lot of women who were interviewed in the book. Jessica Yellen, who runs News Not Noise on Instagram, is
So
kicking it
amazing.
off. And it'll be to learn from me and other teachers. It will be to come together in community. I mean, this is your bonfire. If you were looking for your people, here are 800 of them. And you can spend a year going through the book. We'll go through the exercises. I don't think you can live on fire alone. I really do think it requires a community. So I'm really excited for this to kick off in September.
Oh, that's amazing. Shannon, thank you so much. Where can people find the book?
Go to firedupbook.com or any bookstore that sells books, and hope to see everyone in September at Firestarter University.
Yes, and I'm giving them away too because I bought some extras.
Amazing.
So good. Thank you so much, Shannon. This has been amazing, and you are magnificent.
Well, thank you so much for your support.
She's a woman on fire. Y'all, do you want to run through a brick wall? Because after listening to that, I do. Go pick up Shannon's book, Fired Up. I've linked her info in the show notes and would love for you to connect with her and join the Firestarter University. More than anything, be sure to take action, build community, or join one, and don't let that fire fizzle out. Let it get bigger. And if you want a surefire way, all puns intended, to make change, a podcast is the way to go. If you want support to build yours, book a free clarity call with me at AllisonHair.com/free call. Thanks for hanging out with me in the reinvention room. If you liked today's episode, there are several ways to support the show. I produce this show myself, so it helps me continue to make it. First, please rate and review the show on the platform where you listen, and consider sharing this episode with a friend or five. That's how it grows, by sharing these ideas. Second, please sign up for my email where I send out a short personal note to you every week, and always with a sprinkle of snark and some best finds. You can sign up at AllisonHair.com/email. As always, thanks for listening and hanging out with me in the reinvention room.